when Stuart McAllister was 21, he started having recurring dreams where he was driving an old-fashioned open-top car. The car was red with a long bonnet and spoke wheels. The handbrake was on the outside of the car and the accelerator was on the steering wheel. In the dream, he is driving around a corner towards a junction and immediately loses control where the car ends up on its roof. He would then wake up in a sweat and believes he must have died in the accident. Stuart did not know the make of the car, but one day he found a picture of it in a book. The car was an MG Magna, 4-seater. He found that not only 200 of this model were ever made, Stuart knew nothing about cars, so where had the memory in the dream come from? Stuart attended a college in Salford, Manchester, and in one particular class they studied clothing from certain periods in history. In one project, the tutor brought in some clothing and other items from the 1920s. She asked the students what they thought some of the objects were, and Stuart picked up each object and piece of clothing and was able to say what they were or how they were used. He knew about studs on shirts and how to fasten a dicky bow, although nobody had ever shown him how to do it. Dicky bow ties were very popular in the 1920s. A few days before his 21st birthday, Stuart and his girlfriend visited an antique shop in Manchester. There was an elderly lady working in the shop, and the moment she looked at Stuart, she said to him, "I've got something for you." She then walked away and came back with a package containing a pair of trousers. They were cream woolen trousers with cuffs. He said they were not his trousers, and besides, they would not fit him. She insisted they were his trousers. She would not take any money for them. Stuart left the shop totally bewildered. The trousers fitted him perfectly. Meanwhile, Stuart continued to have the strange dreams about the car accident, and they continued until the age of 30. In 1993, a friend suggested to him that he should try regressive hypnotherapy. In his first session, he looked down and found himself wearing the cream trousers and a pair of brown brogue shoes. He was standing on the edge of a cornfield and the wind was blowing. In his next session, he's in a car upside down and the front wheels are still spinning. He felt nervous and cold and the gear stick was sticking into his leg. It was his dream, but he had not died in the accident as he had assumed. It was the next step of his dream, and he was able to describe everything in detail as though it was happening in real time. There was an embankment on the side of the road with long grass, and he could see cornfields. Then somebody came along with a tractor to assist him, but then left to get help. After a while, an ambulance arrived. It was a green van with a white cross on the side. As they tried to move him, he felt the pain as if it were real. He then flashes forward where he is in a wheelchair in a hospital and has been pushed through rubber doors and his leg is painful. Then a rubber mask is placed over his face and he suddenly wakes up in bed. There was a cage over his legs, and when he looked further, found that they had amputated his legs. It was a horrific, realistic feeling. He believes he was in hospital for almost a year. Although Stuart lived in Surrey, the hospital in his regression was called St Augustine's, but the only other hospital with that name was a mental hospital in Kent in southern England. However, there was a Signet St Augustine's Hospital in Staffordshire in the West Midlands. The regressionist asked him to go back before the accident, and Stuart found himself entering a car dealership. He was able to buy the MG from money his mother had left him. He was 8 when his mother died. The car cost him £90. The young man in the regression had never driven before, and so had never had lessons. He had an accident driving the car home. There was no way his imagination could have come up with the story. He then regressed back even further in that life, where he was now a designer of aeroplane engines. He'd recently come back from a training college in Byfleet, Surrey. On later checks, they found there was a training college in the 1930s called the Aeronautical and Automobile Engineering. In his current life, he'd never heard of such a college and was unfamiliar with the south of England. In the regression, he's visiting various shops to buy motoring equipment before going to the dealership and purchasing gloves, goggles and a helmet. When describing the goggles in detail, he was later able to find a description of the goggles from that period and found that it perfectly matched his description. He then went to another shop and purchased some trousers that were similar to the cream trousers that he was given by the lady. Strangely, the shop in his regression matched the shop where he was given the cream trousers. When the therapist asked him to bring the cream trousers to the next session, he found they had vanished and he never saw them again. He regressed back to his graduation day in Byfleet, where photos were taken with students in front of a plane. He was sitting on the left, second from the end, and the tutors stood behind. He tried to find a copy of the photo, but when the college moved to Guildford, they did not take all the records, but the photo must exist somewhere. He remembers the name of a tutor called Professor Pritchard or Pickford, and the name of some of the students. He knew his name, but did not want to reveal it because it later had a son and daughter who were possibly still alive. He found that he was born in 1914 and died in 1948, aged 34. He was able to give his children names and dates of birth and his wife's name. They married in 1940. He also remembered his parents' names. He was regressed back to where his mother died of cancer, and he is standing over a grave as he throws soil on the coffin. He became very sad and emotional. He described riding on a bus that was white with a maroon flash down the side, known as a bullnose, and sure enough, when he checked the records, he found that the buses from Surrey in that period were identical to the ones in his regression. After his mother died, he went to a boarding school in Harefield near London. The building was covered in ivy and had turrets. It was an old country house that was turned into a school in 1900. The uniform had grey trousers and a green jacket, and the tie was striped green and grey with a silver line in the stripes. He described the dormitories, and at night you would have to stand at the end of the bed as they checked your fingernails, neck and behind your ears. Your bed had to be made correctly. He had 2 shirts and a jumper in the cupboard, and on the inside of the door was a picture of his mother. The dining room was large with panelled walls. At the end was a stage. The youngest had to collect the plates and place them at the end of the table. He described running on the field before someone came up from behind and tackled him. He was initially confused, but after seeing a ball in his hands, he realised he was playing rugby. In that life, he did not like being jumped on, but in his current life, he enjoys rugby. One vivid memory was when he was 11 and leaving school before arriving at Paddington Station. He was picked up by his father and taken to his place of work in Piccadilly. Stuart doesn't know London, but was able to describe the street in detail and his father's office in a building on the corner. He was later able to check it and had described everything in detail. His father was an accountant, and the secretary, for some strange reason, had drawn a line down the back of her legs. During that period, stockings were hard to buy, so women would draw lines from the back of their legs to make it look as if they were wearing stockings. He had to sit on a leather couch with his hands on his lap until his father was ready to leave. They gave him powdered orange that tasted disgusting. He described his father's clothing, where he wore a green visor and had garters on his sleeve to stop them going into the inkwell. He wore a waistcoat with a watch and chain. There was a half-frosted window with the business name on it. His father's boss placed a penny into his palm, which amazed him because his father had never given him any money. When they arrived home, his father took off his shirt, as he always did, and he had a scar on his chest. When he asked his father what the scar was, he told him it was a bayonet wound from World War I. When World War II began, because of his injuries, he did not have to fight. Instead, he helped design parts for aeroplane engines. He ended up marrying the nurse who looked after him in the hospital. Because she was taller than him, he asked whether they could make his tin legs longer so he could be taller than her. He initially found it difficult to walk on the legs because they were stiff and rigid, as there was no movement in the ankle or knee. He talks about his wedding day and the difficulty in walking down the aisles. He was always relieved when he took his legs off. Eventually, he walked without crutches, and his thin legs were later replaced with more flexible legs that could bend. The therapist then asked him to go to a happy day in his life, and it was the birth of his firstborn daughter. They then went forward to the day he died. He was only 34 and was involved in a bus accident. He was sitting behind the driver when he suddenly slammed on the brakes. Because of his false legs, he had no resistance and was slammed into the window between them, before being catapulted backwards and forwards. He felt immense pain in his face before suddenly relaxing. He then left his body and observed what was happening. His wife was giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but he was dead. He sensed a great loss, leaving behind his family. Stuart now has no fear of death, and his only regret is leaving people behind.